the things you said in the past, Jemele, is that Ian has allowed you to take your cape off.
Because strength and Black women have become synonymous. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be a crippling thing in the sense that we assume that we always have to wear this cape, and that if we're not always the model of strength, then we're somehow being imperfect. We also don't want to fall into the trap of always thinking that we have to be somebody else's savior. Because sometimes the person that needs the most saving is us. And what I loved about our relationship is, like, my husband's a great communicator. And even though I might be in media, while I can certainly communicate, I think it has always been difficult for me to communicate vulnerability, for me to be comfortable in that soft place. But when you have trust in your partner, it's easy to be vulnerable. And so because I have such trust in him, it's easy for me to do that.
Welcome to My Legacy for our new listeners and viewers. This isn't your typical solo celebrity interview. This is the show where remarkable people pull back the curtain and bring along the one person who has seen it all, the highs, the lows, the heartbreaks, the one who knows the full, unfiltered story. And today we're joined by someone who has never backed down from saying what needed to be said. Jemele Hill is a trailblazing, award-winning sports journalist, podcast host, author, and unapologetic truth teller. Whether she's calling a game or calling out injustice, her take is always sharp, fearless, and fiercely her own. Jemele, would you mind introducing us to your best, your favorite, your plus one who you brought here today?
Well, thank you, number one, for that incredible intro. And the person that I brought with me today is somebody who, and hopefully my mother won't take this personally, but probably knows me better than anybody, but who knows me the best and who has seen me through so many ups and downs, and also understands my vulnerabilities, which is very important to me because those are the things I have the most trouble showcasing and highlighting. My support system, my rock, someone who I think has the highest integrity of probably any person that I know. So I brought with me my wonderful, beloved, sexy, handsome husband, Ian Wallace.
How was that for an intro? I love it.
Thank you.
But by the time you did both of those, by the time and she introduced Ian and introduced her, I feel like saying amen. All around.
All of our listeners are now putting down the podcast and putting on the video version. They're like, what does he look like?
You know, we all love stories, and we all want to hear every detail. But Jemele, can you tell us how your story began, the two of you?
Well, I'm sure you've asked this question enough to know that when you're speaking with a couple, both people have different versions of how this actually happened.
Tell the truth.
I am going to tell the truth, yes.
Is that right, huh?
That's another amen.
Yes, it's true. And somehow it feels like when men tell their side of the story, it's all so grossly embellished on a lot of accounts. So this was 2014. I was still at ESPN. I had a daily sports discussion show called Numbers Never Lie. And I came back to Michigan State, where I went to school. My husband also went to Michigan State as well, but we went at different times. They asked me to be the homecoming ambassador, if you will. So I had to go back, be in the parade, do all that kind of homecoming stuff. And so I went back there. The show came there as well, just as a support thing. And so, I was on campus for the weekend and going around to different tailgates. This is game day. Went to a tailgate. It was the Black Alumni Tailgate, one of my favorite tailgates to go to when I go to a Michigan State football game. And I was there talking to someone. It was actually, and it turned out to be a friend of my husband's, and I didn't even know him then. And I was talking to him when my husband came up. And as soon as he came up and started talking to his friend, I immediately noticed he's fine. So, I'm not going to lie. It was visually.
I love Ian's smile. He's not saying anything. He's just sitting there smiling. He's grinning.
It's true so far.
So far. Okay, do I have this correct? All right. So I was like, he's fine. Where did he come from? I'm going to continue this conversation. So the three of us started to talk, And there was definitely some flirty eye energy between me and my husband. I just sort of left things there because I had other homecoming duties that I had to do. And I did not expect to see him again. Well, fast forward to a few hours later, Michigan State Black Alumni, they host a big party for homecoming weekend. I went to the party, and sure enough, while I'm at the party, I look across the dance floor, and my husband is standing right there. And I was like, oh, the fine guy from the tailgate, you know? So eye energy, this is just a little aside, a pro tip for ladies out there. Eye energy works. You send the right eye energy, the right body language, you can just bring them on to you, okay? And so I looked at him, and I gave him that eye energy, like, I need you to come over here. And he came over, he got my number. And the rest, as they say, is history. More importantly, too, pro tip for men who are listening, he called me the next day. It wasn't like he waited. He didn't, hold it out for a week to try to see, play it cool. He didn't. He called me the next day.
Eye energy.
Yep, eye energy.
And when you see something, say something. Right.
Correct.
So in other words, call the next day. Don't play games.
Immediate follow up. Don't let her forget you.
Follow up.
There's no need to play games with a grown woman.
No. And so, babe, did I get that right?
Mostly true. You forgot to mention love at first sight. Not for me, for her.
Oh. See what I'm saying? You always got to put a little extra on it.
Well, okay, we got to hear your side of the story. Love at first sight. What did you first see when you saw her? And most importantly, when did you fall hard?
Well, it was an instant connection when we first seen each other. So it was crazy that we didn't exchange numbers, and we left it to fate. So we seen each other that same night, and she was just shining on the dance floor. It was almost like a spotlight was on her. And I think Keisha Cole's Sent from Heaven was playing as I walked over.
And if it wasn't, that's how it's always going to be remembered. I love it.
Yes. It sounds good. But, as we got to know each other and we talked more and more, Jemele was just different. She was truly a unicorn. She was different from a lot of females that I had been with in the past, and she was just a breath of fresh air. So I struggled early. I didn't want to fall in love. I was trying not to. I was like, no, it's too soon.
One of the things you said in the past, Jemele, is that Ian has allowed you to take your cape off. And I love that. I think there's so many women in general and Black women in particular that feel as if we have to be so strong for everyone and everything and to have a soft space. And it also ties into when you introduced him, you use the word vulnerable, that he allows you to be vulnerable. Can you just talk a little bit and share with our listeners and unfold what that means to you?
I mean, I think you're exactly right that, because strength and Black women have become synonymous. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be a crippling thing in the sense that we assume that we always have to wear this cape and that if we're not always the model of strength, then we're somehow being imperfect. And while it's true that we certainly have to have our armor on, we certainly have to be ready for all the things that are coming at us, we also don't want to fall into the trap of always thinking that we have to be somebody else's savior. Because sometimes the person that needs the most saving is us. And probably the best thing that we can do for ourselves is find people, a community, places where we don't always have to be the one that comes up with the solution, always have to be the one who sacrifices, always have, we don't have to constantly put ourselves in that mode. I mean, listen, we save Wakanda, we save the democracy. It's like at some point, like we have to really save ourselves. And what I loved about our relationship is like my husband's a great communicator. And even though I might be in media, while I can certainly communicate, I think it has always been difficult for me to communicate vulnerability, for me to be comfortable in that soft place. And just organically and naturally, it was never a conversation that we had, but it was through action and through communication that it was really easy for me to see that this was someplace that I didn't have to always feel like I had to be the strong one. But when you have trust in your partner, it's easy to be vulnerable. And so because I have such trust in him, it's easy for me to do that.
So was it hard then for you to find that place? Because I think for so many women, and we love being strong, it really is who we are. But to have that dance of also being vulnerable, again, like, we're out in the world. I always say that, we've shown up for this country, and now it's also time for the country to show up for us. And so for you to find that space also of being vulnerable, to have a place to fall into, was that scary for you at first?
Oh, it's terrifying. Nobody goes willingly. Like, I don't want to make it seem like, vulnerability knocked on the door and I was like, hi, I'm ready. Like, no, it was a process, as it is for a lot of women, especially if you, independent, been used to doing everything on your own and used to being your own savior. Like, it's hard to sometimes relinquish some of that. So then to me, the responsibility was on me to start to open up and to share that and to be more vulnerable with him, because he had shown me that he was more than capable of being the soft place, the landing, the place where I would feel that sense of comfort and peace. It was then on me to take my armor off, to take off, my battle gear and be that person with him.
Well, Jemele, I love how you described the impact the relationship has on you. And if I could shift it back to you, Ian, if I could ask, what have you experienced being in that relationship with Jemele, and how has it changed how you show up in a relationship?
Well, being with a woman who's strong as Jemele, I was never intimidated by it. It was actually something that I cherish, just having a strong woman and being there for her. And there was a wall that was up, initially when we met, but by trade, I'm a salesperson, so I ask a lot of questions. And the questions were genuine. It was organic. I wanted to know about her and, the different experiences that she had in her life and learning from her. And it was funny because I remember asking questions to her mom, and she's like, why are you asking so many questions? And it's like, I just want to know. I'm just curious. I want to know Jemele.
And by the way, I think that's an underrated ability, because I think a lot of women have experienced having interactions with men, especially if there's like some level of romantic interest where the men tend to talk more about themselves and it's okay to talk about yourself, because I want to learn about you too. It is something that I always keep in the back of my mind, that if I'm, if I'm on a date with a guy and he doesn't ask me a single question, I think that's a bit of a pink flag. I'm like, he didn't ask me anything about myself. And he was so different because he asked me a lot of questions. And more importantly, I should say this because I've told this story before, and I feel like now I have a chance to like fully clarify it, is that, one of the things I loved about him is that he never asked me about work. All of the questions were about, who I was, maybe how I grew up. We have a lot of things in common. We're both from Detroit. So that was like a natural connection between us. We both went to Michigan State, another natural, kind of connection. And so just getting to know the totality of who I am. Because, when I was at ESPN and you're in such a high visible position, naturally a lot of men watch ESPN. And they're very familiar with the personalities on ESPN. And it was always kind of irritating to me that if I was talking to a guy and he's asking me 45 questions about ESPN. Like, do you want to be on a date with ESPN or do you want to be on a date with me? Like, don't stop asking me about what Stephen A. Smith is like, what Skip Bayless is like, what's it like to be on Around the Horn. Like, I don't, to me, that's not really getting to know me. That's getting to know my job.
So pro tip number 4. Are we on 4?
I'm dropping them. I'm dropping these gems, man.
Yeah, we're going to have after this, it'll be a 1, 2, 3. So now pro tip number 4 is to ask questions.
Yes, man. Ask questions, and don't, ask questions that lead you to understand who this person is. Asking how they grew up, or, how, what were your parents like, and, asking about school, and, and just generally getting some texture about what made them into the person that they are.
In your earlier years, as you were matriculating through your early years of the career, and particularly as a black woman, who were your mentors? Who were some of your mentors, or were there mentors?
Oh, I had a lot. Of course, everybody, is fortunate enough to have the people in their family be your earliest mentor. So, I had my mother, who certainly always stressed the importance of education, who, whether I liked it or not, she was always on me in terms of discipline. My grandmother, she also was a strong influence in my life. She originally from the South, from Kentucky, migrated to Detroit, right before she started high school. And she went back and got her bachelor's degree. She already had 3 kids. And she was in her, I think, her mid-30s when she went and got her bachelor's degree from Wayne State University in Detroit. Spent her professional life working as a social worker for the state of Michigan. And so those were, 2 strong women in my life who always stressed the importance of education, of building a life for myself, of upward mobility. And Detroit as a city, because percentage-wise, it's the blackest city in America right now. And certainly because that's always been such a strong part of the identity of Detroit. Coming up through public schools in Detroit, the sense of identity that I had by the time I went to college was very strong. I was blessed and fortunate enough to have a lot of black teachers who poured into me. And certainly early on, as I began showing an interest in writing, like I started my journalism path in high school. I was very lucky to have started so early. And so my journalism teachers, in my memoir, it was a reason why I made sure that I acknowledged my teachers in the acknowledgement section, because teachers don't get enough credit, number one. And a lot of times they don't know how sometimes their students turn out. And I think it's affirming for them to know that as much resistance as kids as we may give you, that seeds are still being planted even as we're resisting. And I think about my creative writing teacher. I went to Mumford High School in Detroit, Miss Blackhawk, who I still email occasionally to this day. My journalism teacher, Miss Sebring, my other journalism teacher, Mrs. Platt, I still know them because I remember the lessons that they taught me. So those were early mentors.
I love the shout outs by name to the teachers, by the way. That was so awesome to hear that. Like, everyone's got to do that. Please continue.
Got to do it by name. And even now that I know them as adults, I cannot call them by their first name. It's like impossible for me to do this. My middle school teacher, Mrs. Johnson, and, my counselor, Miss Todd. Like, I remember all of the people who were giving me that encouragement, planting those seeds. And when I first started working for the Detroit Free Press, the professional paper in Detroit, in high school, answering phones in the sports department, it was they were one of the sports departments that actually had women who were reporters, and they took me on the sports staff, that is, and they took me under their wing. I mean, the first time I attended professional practice, my mentor, Johnette Howard, she took me. She was doing a big story on the Detroit Lions on their former head coach, Wayne Fontes, and that was the first time I got to see an NFL practice. And seeing her report and seeing her talk to different players, sometimes it may sound strange, but sometimes ignorance is bliss, just in the sense of I was too ignorant to know that sports journalism was something women weren't supposed to do. I didn't know that because so many people had given me the confidence that this was where I belonged. So by the time I started really making my way in the industry and I looked around the room, and in most spaces, I was either the only black person, the only woman, and certainly the only black woman. I had enough confidence to know that even though this room looks like this, I belong here and I have just as much of a right to be here as anybody else. So it was too late. They couldn't ruin my confidence by then, right? So I was really fortunate that I had a long list of people who poured into me and who constantly affirmed that, hey, you're in the right place. You're doing the right thing, and you just have to simply keep going.
Like, follow, and subscribe to the My Legacy podcast. And most importantly, share this with someone who needs a reminder of their strength today. You talk about courage, and I want to reflect on what that courage has meant because, very famously in 2018, you called out President Trump's racism. You called out Jerry Jones, his stance on players taking a knee. And that ultimately cost you your job. That's courage. And so when you talk about courage, when you reflect back on that time, what did that teach you about your voice? What did that teach you about your values? And frankly, what did it teach you about your willingness to risk it all for what you believed in?
Well, I'm sure a lot of people who have been in far more dangerous positions than that one, especially as with you all being so intimately acquainted with the civil rights movement, is that you don't know if you're going to meet the moment until the moment finds you. You have no idea. So if you would have asked me before that actually happened, hey, if this was the scenario, what would you do? You think you know what you would do. You think you know how you might respond, but you don't really actually know till you're right there in the fire. And so all of the decisions that I made as the, White House called for me to be fired, as, Donald Trump singled me out on social media, as that was happening, I mean, I'm making mental decisions in real time. And I had to sort of have a few moments with myself and saying, like, okay, if this results in you being fired, like right in this moment, what are you going to do? Or if they put it on the table, hey, either apologize to the president or you're going to have to leave here. What are you going to do? And every instinct and every cell in my body was like, if they ask me to apologize to the president, I'm not going to do it. And I made that clear very early. I'm never apologizing to him. I said what I said. And we just got to live with that. The other part of it, too, is like knowing that, hey, if this is the end of the road right here, I didn't leave ESPN until a year later, and I left on my own terms. And if at the moment they had to make a business decision, I would have lived with it. I mean, it wouldn't feel good, especially given all the work that I put in to get to that point. And there's not many people who get the opportunity to anchor the 6 o'clock Sports Center, one of the sort of treasured time slots at ESPN. But if that was the result, that was the result. And when stuff like this happens where your integrity and your character is questioned, you have to be able to live with yourself. And I would not have been able to live with myself had I capitulated in a way that I think would not have spoke to who authentically I am. So it was a lot of lessons that I found out in real time, and just because the situation was there. And I'm thankful for that, because when similar situations, maybe not always involving the president of the United States, but when other tests of your character, your integrity, when those things happen, it's muscle memory. Now you're confident because you've already done it. And I've done it at a level that most people don't get to do it at. And so when I'm in meetings or in determining business relationships and things pop up where you have to stand on something, I'm so much more comfortable doing that because I've already done it before. It's very similar to an athlete. I mean, I'm sure Michael Jordan missed a lot of game-winning shots before he actually made them. And when he finally made one, it became muscle memory. And then after that, that dude was never losing. So I sort of approach it with the mentality that an athlete might.
So even before that happened, let's also go back to your beginning days of ESPN. Because as you mentioned earlier, you found yourself in rooms where you were, most times one, if not the only woman, certainly probably the only Black woman. So if we're talking about legacy on this show, and you at ESPN early 2000s, that legacy is there. But you said about that time that it is both isolating and yet motivating. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about what you mean by that?
So the isolating part is when I was a sports columnist at the Orlando Sentinel. This would have been in 2005 and most of 2006. I was the only Black female sports columnist at a daily newspaper in North America. And notice I didn't just say America, right? So that's one out of 405 newspapers. And that is an embarrassing statistic for the profession of journalism. And a lot of people might have thought that that would have given me some sense of accomplishment. It did not. What it was communicating to me, and even worse, communicating to other women who might want to get in the business, is that your voices aren't necessary, nor are they valued. And so that's the isolating part. And, it also comes with a lot of scrutiny because you're the only one. And a lot of Black people have been in this situation in all industries, is that when you're the only one, you then become the test case, right? So you have to carry yourself a certain way because you are living with the burden of, if I mess up, no one else is coming after me. Mm-hmm. Black people aren't perfect, right? So it's like if I make some junior mistakes or whatever, if that's the reason why you won't see value in Black women having voices in the sports space, then that to me reflects more on you than it does on me. So you're carrying all of this, but at the same time, getting to ESPN, a place that is considered to be for our profession at the very top. If you're in sports media, being the most powerful sports media company in America, then there's something to be celebrated by being able to advance and take that step and realize that all the hard work has brought you to this place and brought you to this sense of elevation. But it's always, to me, about who is able to come behind you as a result. Now, ESPN is in a very different position because they can hire whoever they want. And you look at their team picture, and it's very diverse because they have a lot of women. And even before I got there, Robin Roberts was the one who set the table, and so they've always had a steady pipeline of women of color and putting them in certain positions. Where I was a little bit different is that they were traditional anchors, and I was one of the few that were able to develop a foothold and an imprint at ESPN by giving my opinion, by creating conversation based off my perspective and my experience that I had as a sports journalist over the course of many years. So I was very thrilled to be there, but I also was fully aware that if I walk into one more room and I'm the only one in there, that's not a good room. It's like I've never been one of those people, and there unfortunately are some people of color who are like this, that they do want to be the only one in the room. I don't want to be the only one in the room because I don't know everything. I don't represent the entire totality of women, of Black women. I do not do that. And so it's important that we all, when we go in these rooms, that it's not just about getting in the room. It's about getting in the room and kind of breaking it up and opening the door even wider so that more of us, so it's a flood of us coming in.
I loved when Kamala Harris said, upon accepting the vice presidency, I might be the first, but I won't be the last. I love that sentiment. And so here you are at, ESPN, seemingly from the outside, riding on top of the world. Then you had this unfair attack and this fall from where you had worked so hard to be. But throughout all of that, Ian was there. And he, walked with you through that storm and was always at your side. So my question is for you, Ian, and particularly for couples that are listening right now, and if they're going through the storm, they're watching someone that they love go through the storm, what advice would you have for couples walking that path?
I believe communication is the key. Constant communication. When when she was going through her storm, really, first and foremost, I wanted to make sure that I was there and she felt my presence and she knew that she wasn't alone. We had a lot of good times, and that was probably the most challenging part of our relationship up to that point. So my biggest thing was making sure that she didn't feel alone, making sure that she felt my presence and we were going to get through this together. And naturally, I'm a fixer. So sometimes I have to dial that back because sometimes she may just want to vent and she just needs a listening ear versus, solution after solution. But my goal was to remain positive throughout the entire situation because I knew something good would come from it. And a lot of things came from it that were good on a positive note. So just positivity and communication would be my advice to any couples going through any type of turmoil.
Yeah, and I remember when I got suspended, so I had a 2-week suspension. I think I spent the first week with you, right? So that to me said a lot about our relationship, is that my immediate instinct after I got suspended was I need to hop on the plane and I need to be with him, right? Because I knew that the comfort I was looking for, I knew the solace I was looking for, I knew all of that could be found in him. And, that spoke volumes about our, relationship. And I know it probably wasn't the easiest from you in the sense of that, here you have me being discussed on all these news channels. And he's also in the corporate world, so you have colleagues that are watching this.
Well, the challenge for me was, under normal circumstances, if I was dating a regular woman, if she got into an issue with someone at work, I would just go up there and have a conversation with that guy. But with it being the president of the United States, I was a little handcuffed, so it was a little challenging for me. So, and that's another thing, we have fun, so making her laugh and just making her feel comfortable.
I think for our viewers and listeners who might not know you as well, I don't think they would fully understand that your story is one of incredible courage. Like, people would, I think, be surprised that you would take on the president of the United States until they actually understand more about your origin. You wrote about your mom. You wrote about, families battling with addiction. You wrote about, the challenges that you overcame in your life and your origin story. Can you bring some of our listeners more deeply into those moments that shaped who you were on just a very fundamental level? And what actually was, I'm curious to also ask, what was the hardest part to reveal that, to share that with people?
I wanted to be as transparent with the people reading when I sit across and interview people, as I want them to be with me. And I wanted to kind of leave it all out there because a lot of times, especially if people view you as being successful, they see the picture before them now. They don't see what it took to get to that, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important to share that so that people understand that, listen, we're all going to face challenges. We all have some kind of trauma we're dealing with, but those are things that do not have to define your journey. And it was especially important for me to share the fact that, I grew up in Detroit. Growing up there, I'm a mid-70s baby. So by the time I was coming of age, it's like, that's when a lot of crime, a lot of drugs, it really sieged on Detroit. And unfortunately, my father and also my mother, they battled through drug addiction during a time where a lot of people in Detroit were battling with those same things. And, not just sort of the drug addiction having a particular legacy in my family, but also sexual trauma and sexual abuse as well. And so dealing with those issues early on in life were as debilitating as they could be at times for my mother in particular. They also were preparing me for a journey that I didn't even realize that I was going to be on. And so later on, you fast forward to when I get into it with the president, and a lot of people were, naturally asking me, like, are you okay? And, how are you making it through? I was like, if you knew what I made through before I even got to this point, you would see why I laugh at that question. It's like, it wouldn't even rank in the top 20 of worst things that I've been through. I mean, yes, it played out very publicly, and, there were some professional challenges I've had to overcome as a result. And to be frank, still having to overcome because he's back in office. So, while having to deal with that, it did not compare to having to up close witness my mother battle a drug addiction. And so I wanted to make sure that I wrote very honestly about those moments, because there are a lot of people who deal with addiction in their family. And I wanted to, hopefully, for people, remove the layer of shame. Because there's nothing that you should feel ashamed of if you come from a background that is similar to the one that I came from. And because I do have that upbringing of being, the child of addicts and seeing some of the things that I've seen, it gives me actually an incredible perspective as a person and as a journalist as well. Because I think as a journalist, you're not very good if you can't write with empathy. And I think as I've reported on a number of different stories, some in sports, some outside of sports, I'm able to take that empathy into these different situations. And I think give people who are reading or watching an honest reflection about the complications of life. So it's funny because when my mother and I did Red Table Talk, we kind of had this kind of back and forth about that, because when I told her that the things she had gone through, really I wouldn't be where I am if she hadn't gone through those. But she sees it another way, that as more of an indication of her failure. It's like, you should not have to have seen that to learn those lessons. mothers, obviously, they always want to protect you. And I do understand why she would say that. But I don't know that if I would have, strange as it may sound, because all the things I went through are things statistically you're not supposed to make it to where I am. But I don't think I would have made it had I not gone through those things.
One of the things that I keep thinking as I listen to your story and the more and more I get to know you is that this whole, thinking of, my dear, they tried to crush you, but they didn't know, darling, that you were a diamond. So every single piece of pressure and crushing actually was revealing more and more and more of that brilliance of a diamond. And for anybody that's going through something tough or challenging, if you're there and you're surviving it, just remember too, that thing that's trying to crush you, they don't know that you are a diamond. And when I think of you as a little one, I can't help but wonder, Ian, if you could sit with a younger version of your phenomenal wife, what would you say to her?
The future's bright. The future's bright.
That is a heck of a question, might I add.
That was a great question. It was a great question. Yeah, I mean, I would echo the same things that Jemele mentioned, just in terms of everything that you're about to experience is going to prepare you for life. It is going to prepare you to deal with the different things that you'll encounter in life. And while it may be hard, the things that you're experiencing is going to make you tougher, and it's going to make you better and better equipped to deal with your future.
A lot of times we don't know what exactly that we are being prepared for. And I think, knowing the person that you are and just how you're built and the way that, you move, I often marvel at our relationship from the standpoint of I think if you'd have asked me in my 20s, what's the kind of man that you want? And to me, this is more a reflection of my immaturity and who you are. Is I don't think I would have been able to come up with the characteristics that you have because I just wasn't thinking on that level, right? I don't think if you'd have asked me at 25, what kind of man do you want? I might have named a job. I might have named how somebody looked, but I wouldn't say what matters to me is that, somebody that gives you a sense of calm and peace, somebody who makes you laugh. I don't know that I would have said that then, or somebody who carries himself with this level of integrity that that you can trust, that has a good heart, that treats people a certain way, kindness. I would not have probably named those things. And you're all of those things.
Yeah, I definitely would have told young Jemele to stop wasting her time dating. Just focus on your career. You don't really need to date. Something good is around the corner.
And it'll be at a Michigan State
right.
homecoming.
I was you're going to have to wait till you almost 40, but it's going to be there.
We'd love it if you share this episode of the My Legacy podcast with someone you admire, someone who shows up, who cares deeply, who lives their legacy every day.
Jemele, you said that athletes have become perhaps the new civil rights voices. How do you feel that those platforms can now be utilized to continue to create progress?
Athletes have a lot more power than I think they realize. I mean, I don't think it just applies to them. I think it applies to us in general as people because, what's the other adage? The greatest way you can take away somebody's power is to convince them they don't have any. And there's a lot of us that have been convinced that we don't have any. And so we sort of sit in this cycle of apathy a lot of times, allowing things to happen to us rather than going out for fighting for what we want. And athletes sit in a very unique position, especially black athletes, because if it's one thing we definitely care about in this country, it's sports. And they are able to, sports is one of the few things that still bring us together. We're a very divided country politically, divided when it comes to religion, but yet and still, if you guys are in Atlanta, if the Falcons are having a great season, you have a Muslim fan, you have a Christian fan, black, white, queer fan, different genders, different races, different socioeconomic background. Y'all will all come together and cheer for the Falcons. And so that's the power that sports still has in our society. And because it has that power, athletes have the position to get people to consider things and to look at things in a different way. It's amazing how people respond when their favorite athlete speaks to that experience, something they may not be familiar with. I go back to when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and the first athletes to take a stand and to bring awareness to that were the Miami Heat when they had LeBron and D Wade, and they just took a picture, all of them wearing hoodies, and I think it was D Wade who talked about how Trayvon Martin could have been their son, and that is a message that resonated. And next thing you know, you saw people of all races changing their avatars on social media wearing hoodies. And, we have examples throughout history of where when athletes use their platform to speak to injustice, to speak to, social justice overall, just how powerful that can be, because people are much more likely to receive it if it comes from someone they already admire.
It's our turn now in the long march toward freedom. And one of the ways in which you do that also personally is through your podcast, Spolitics. Did I say that correct?
Spolitics.
Spolitics.
Yeah. In general, the whole point of the podcast was to connect the dots between sports and politics. And as much and as popular as it is for sports fans to say either I don't want politics in sports or I just want to escape, politics is all around you in sports, whether you like it or not. One of the biggest stories of the past few weeks was the Department of Defense trying to erase Jackie Robinson's legacy. And that is very much a sports story as it is a political story because of what Jackie Robinson stood for. And also an opportunity for people to understand that his legacy stretches beyond just him integrating Major League Baseball in 1947, which, by the way, was some 20-some years before we got the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. It was before, preceded, Brown versus the Board of Education. So sports is often in a position to lead in these difficult areas. And so I just wanted people to remind or to be reminded that relationship has been there from the start. Politics have literally always been a part of sports.
We have a project called Realize the Dream, which is to unite the country through service with 100 million hours of service collectively together, pledged and committed by my father-in-law's 100th birthday in 2029. One of the things that we are incredibly honored to say is that every major sports league has signed up to join in the Realize the Dream initiative. So we have the NFL, Inspire Change. We have Major League Baseball, and we also have the NBA that are all coming together with us, joining forces with us to get the word out and get into communities to do some service together. Well, let's talk sports. Let's two women talking sports. So I have to ask before we wrap up, we're getting ready to head into the NBA playoffs.
Correct.
So what do you think will be some of the biggest stories from the playoffs?
Well, unfortunately, they won't involve Atlanta, so I'm sorry to tell you that. I'm sorry to tell you that. I do believe Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who plays for the Oklahoma City Thunder, I think he's going to be the MVP. He's getting quite a chase from Nikola Jokic, who plays for Denver, but I think it will be his. And that'll be interesting because I believe that would make it the fifth straight year that the NBA MVP has gone to a foreign-born player, which is going to create a lot of interesting conversations around the league, I'm sure. I do think this is Oklahoma City's year to make the NBA Finals. I think they're going to get there.
Oh, yeah, the from Martin.
Nodding,
Okay.
Yeah.
They've been the best team all season. And I know that there is a level of doubt because they're still young and people kind of have a hard time wrapping their minds around the fact like, OKC, sure they are. I think they faced a lot of that last year. But I think after losing and being a year more experienced, it feels like them. I think it's going to be an OKC Boston Celtics final. And as much as it pains me to say, because, we're from Detroit, so we're Pistons fans, I do think Boston is going to win the title again. But the good thing we have to look forward to is our Pistons will be in the playoffs.
Okay.
We have been irrelevant for too long. We were the worst team in the NBA last year. I don't know if we set the record for most losses in a row.
Yeah.
Yeah, we set the record. And it was a hell of a turnaround to go from that to us now being firmly, solidly in the playoffs. Like that, if you ask me the thing I'm most excited about for the NBA playoffs, it is seeing the Pistons back in the playoffs.
Okay, Ian, I'm going to put you in the hot seat then. Okay, so we've had a lot of conversations. We've had a lot of topics here. But this one, we got to go radical transparency on me, okay?
Okay.
No hold barred.
Okay.
Okay, let's talk sports
I'm
for a second.
already scared.
Exactly. What is one opinion that you hold to, no matter what, no matter how much the woman next to you disagrees with? One thing in sports.
In sports?
Yes. You got to disagree with her sometimes, and I imagine it's not easy.
This is one that we go back and forth with a lot.
I want to hear it. I want to hear what you debate on in sports.
So I'm a Pistons fan.
Okay.
I'm a Detroiter.
Okay.
But during the Michael Jordan days, I roll with the Bulls. So
That's almost sacrilege.
I'm sorry.
For
Michael
our
Jordan
listeners,
is
there's a thumb going down for this powerful woman to his right. Yes, please continue.
Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player ever. So as a kid, I was born in '80. So as a kid, that was my hero. So when the Pistons walked out after they lost, after years of terrorizing Michael Jordan and, being super physical and basically cheating, beating him up, they walked out. They walked out. They didn't shake his hand after years of beating him up. And Jemele, she's a homer. She takes up for the Pistons.
She's
and
shaking her
to
head. She's shaking her head for those who can't see.
to me, right is right, wrong is wrong. I don't care if Jemele is wrong, she's wrong, even though she's my wife. But the Pistons were wrong, and she wants to argue with me about that.
I will always. I'm standing firmly on the hill of the Pistons had every right to not shake the Bulls' hand because during that same series, Michael Jordan called the Pistons illegitimate champions. It's not our fault you couldn't beat us, okay? And I get it, but that's what set everything in motion is that the Pistons felt some kind of way because he completely devalued their championship. And Michael Jordan is so petty. That is the reason why Isaiah Thomas wasn't on the Dream Team. It was because of him.
Here we go. You guys started a fight.
That's what the street committee says.
We have loved having the two of you be so open, so vulnerable, so funny, so supportive to each other, so uplifting. Jemele, sharing your story, how you've chosen to write it and rewrite it again, how you've chosen to own it and live it, the courage, the consequences, the leaning forward, Ian, supporting, championing together in such a beautiful example. Thank you for living your legacy and for sharing it with all of us here today.
All right. Well, thank you guys. We appreciate you all having us.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all so very much.
Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed today's conversation, subscribe, share, and follow us at My Legacy Movement on social media. New episodes drop every Tuesday with bonus content every Thursday. Listen on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, may you find inspiration to live your legacy.